It was the kind of afternoon that felt perfectly ordinary, the kind people never expect to become a turning point in their lives. The sun hung lazily in the sky over Waverly, a quiet, tree-lined town where children rode bikes in groups and neighbors waved from their porches. 8-year-old Daniel Whitmore had just finished lunch and was out in the backyard with his golden retriever, Max, his best friend and constant companion. The air buzzed softly with the hum of cicadas, and the occasional bark from Max echoed over the fence, blending with distant lawnmowers and birdsong. Daniel wore his favorite red baseball shirt, dirt on his knees from playing catch. Every now and then, Max would chase after the ball, return it with his tail wagging, then flop down in the shade before leaping up for the next round. From the kitchen window, Ellen Whitmore smiled as she watched her son play. She was slicing lemons for fresh lemonade, glancing up every few moments to check on him. It was a routine, safe day, nothing seemed out of place. A breeze rustled the leaves. A dog barked a few houses down. The clock ticked past 2:30 p.m. She turned to wipe her hands, maybe for just a minute, and when she looked back out the window, everything had changed. The backyard was still. No bark, no movement. The tennis ball rested untouched in the grass. Ellen frowned, stepping outside, calling out, "Daniel! Max!" Nothing. No laughter. No rustling of bushes. She walked the perimeter of the yard, her voice rising with each call. The gate was latched. The fence was high. There were no tire tracks in the gravel, no strangers around. But something caught her eye. The fence near the back was slightly bent outward, as if something had pushed against it with force. Panic rose in her chest like cold water. She searched frantically, shouting into the woods behind the house. But Daniel and Max were gone, as if they had vanished into thin air, from the safest place a boy could be. Ellen's screams shattered the calm of the neighborhood. Within minutes, neighbors emerged from their homes, alerted by her panic. Some ran to help, others called the police. It didn't take long before officers arrived, walking through the backyard with flashlights despite the lingering daylight, questioning Ellen through her tears. The fence was examined, but no conclusive evidence was found. No blood, no torn fabric, no prints that could be followed. Just that one portion, bent outward, almost like a door quietly pushed open. A search perimeter was set up quickly. Officers fanned out, and neighbors volunteered to comb through the nearby woods, the creek trail, and the old orchard on the town's edge. By nightfall, Waverly was transformed. Helicopters circled overhead with spotlights. Officers and volunteers trudged through thickets, shouting Daniel's name into the dark. Search dogs barked and pulled at their leashes. But even with Max's scent, they found nothing. It was as though the dog had disappeared too, unusual, as trained dogs often return home even when frightened. The disappearance of both child and animal deepened the mystery. For days, the town remained gripped by urgency and fear. Daniel's picture was plastered across poles, store windows, and school entrances. Missing, Daniel Whitmore, age 8, last seen wearing a red baseball shirt. News trucks parked on the street, reporters with microphones framed against yellow police tape. Waverly, a town that had never known tragedy, found itself in national headlines. Every lead ended in disappointment. A man reported seeing a boy matching Daniel's description at a gas station 3 towns over. It turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. A woman swore she heard a dog barking in an abandoned silo, but nothing was found. Tips poured in, then slowed to a trickle. Slowly, the search operation was scaled down. The town's attention shifted back to daily life. But for Ellen and those closest to the family, time didn't move forward. It froze, locked in that afternoon, in that silence, and in the unbearable question, how does a boy vanish from his own backyard, in broad daylight, without a single trace? Ellen Whitmore refused to let Daniel become just another name in a folder marked cold case. In the weeks following his disappearance, she barely slept. Her eyes, once soft and full of warmth, became shadowed with exhaustion and grief. She sat at the kitchen table each night, going over the same notes, newspaper clippings, and police reports, highlighting timelines, circling areas on maps, listing names of people who had been nearby. Every call, no matter how far-fetched, was followed up. She drove hours out of town chasing vague sightings, sometimes with hope, sometimes with dread. Each false lead carved another wound, but she never stopped. Somewhere in her heart, she believed Daniel was still alive. His bedroom remained untouched. His small bed was still made with his favorite space-themed blanket, the shelves lined with dinosaur figurines and books. His drawings remained taped to the wall, faded now but carefully preserved. Every night before bed, Ellen would sit on the edge of the mattress and talk to him. Just in case. Some nights she'd cry softly, clutching the stuffed dog he once carried everywhere. Other nights, she'd whisper promises, that she hadn't given up, that she was still looking. On his birthday each year, she baked the same chocolate cake he loved. She set a plate at the table with his name on it and left the porch light on all night. These rituals gave her strength, or maybe just something to hold on to. She joined support groups for parents of missing children, but found little comfort there. No one else had a story quite like hers, one where the child vanished silently, alongside his dog, in a yard surrounded by fences and family. Her obsession strained relationships. Some friends stopped visiting. Her sister gently urged her to try and move on. But Ellen couldn't. Moving on felt like betrayal. She began documenting everything in journals, what she saw, what she heard, dreams she had, symbols she noticed. Patterns, coincidences, anything. She called it the thread. She believed that if she pulled it hard enough, one day, it would unravel the truth. Years passed. And still, she kept searching. Because for Ellen Whitmore, the world hadn't moved forward from July 18, 1986. That day was a wound that never closed, a question that refused to be answered, and a hope she clung to like breath. It was a damp autumn afternoon in 2006 when a group of high school students from Waverly set out on a weekend hiking trip. They were a tight-knit bunch, outdoorsy, curious, and always looking for forgotten places to explore. Their plan was to follow an old logging trail that snaked through the forest north of town, a place not many locals ventured anymore. The trail was overgrown, branches clawing at their jackets, mud squishing under their boots. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became, just the crunch of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. About 4 miles in, one of the teens spotted a collapsed structure nestled between thick trees. Moss covered most of it, and the wood was rotted and split. At first glance, it looked like a pile of debris, but closer inspection revealed the outline of a small cabin, what had once been a one-room hunting shelter, now half swallowed by the forest. Curiosity got the best of them. They poked around carefully, brushing aside old leaves and debris. That's when one of them noticed something buried under a piece of broken wall paneling, something metallic, caked in rust and soil. They dug it out slowly. It was a dog collar, leather, brittle with age, but still intact enough to read the engraving on a dull, rusted tag, Max. The name struck one of them as familiar. Wasn't that the name of the dog that went missing with that boy years ago? One whispered. The others didn't know the details, but they remembered the story, an old mystery that had faded into local legend. Unsure of what to do, they took photos of the collar and its location, then reported it to the sheriff's office the following day. By the time authorities arrived, the discovery had already begun to stir the community. News spread quickly that something linked to Daniel Whitmore's case had surfaced after 2 decades of silence. Investigators cordoned off the area, treating it as an active scene. The collar was taken for forensic analysis. Soil samples were collected. Every remaining inch of the old cabin was examined with meticulous care. And then something else was found, a wooden beam with faint carvings on the side. Letters and numbers, almost lost to time. No full words, but patterns, like someone had been counting days. Scratch marks, irregular but intentional, carved deep with a knife or sharp stone. It was chilling. Combined with the collar, it was enough to shake even the most skeptical officers. This wasn't just a forgotten hunting shack. Someone had been here. Maybe Max. Maybe Daniel. Maybe both. The forest had been silent for 20 years. And now, it was beginning to speak. The collar's discovery lit a fire beneath the Waverly Police Department like nothing had in years. The old case file of Daniel Whitmore was pulled from storage, its corners yellowed and brittle, thick with notes and dead ends. For 2 decades, it had collected dust. But now, with physical evidence newly unearthed, everything changed. Detectives who had once worked the case returned from retirement as consultants. New faces on the force approached the mystery with fresh eyes. What had once seemed like a closed chapter was now an open wound. The collar was sent to a regional lab for analysis. Despite the years, some materials had survived. The leather was aged and cracked, but intact enough to confirm it was manufactured in the early 1980s. The metal tag, though corroded, bore tool marks identical to those of a local engraver still in town. He confirmed that Ellen Whitmore had come in during the summer of 1985 to get her son's dog tag made. DNA testing on the collar didn't reveal much, too degraded, but traces of animal hair still clung to the inner strap. DNA specialists confirmed it was consistent with Max's breed and hair color. For the first time in 20 years, there was proof the dog had made it to that cabin. Cadaver dogs were brought in. They alerted near a partially collapsed section of the floor behind the cabin. A small excavation was conducted, and what they uncovered next shifted the entire investigation: a few tiny bones. They were too small to be human, and tests later confirmed they belonged to a canine. Max had likely perished there. Whether he died alone or with someone still remained unclear. As investigators swept the structure more thoroughly, they noticed a portion of the back wall remained sturdier than the rest. One detective noticed something odd: what looked like paper, nailed between the wooden slats, barely holding on under years of moisture and decay. Carefully extracted and dried, it revealed something completely unexpected: a hand-drawn map. The map appeared childlike, drawn in pencil, with shaky lines, but it was clear in its intent. It showed the cabin as a starting point, marked with a small box. A crude trail snaked through what was clearly the surrounding forest. Trees, a creek, and, at the end of the path, what looked like an X, drawn over a jagged symbol. It wasn't a place the police recognized immediately. It wasn't on any town-sanctioned trail maps. But when overlaid with topographical data, it matched an uncharted section of dense woodland, home to an old cave system long thought inaccessible. The drawing was eerily deliberate. Initials were scrawled near the cabin symbol, DW. The same as Daniel Whitmore. It didn't prove he had drawn it. But it suggested that he, or someone who had known him, had been there. That he may have survived beyond the day he vanished. Maybe hours. Maybe longer. But not alone. The presence of a map, bones, and Max's collar pointed toward a chilling possibility: Daniel had tried to find a way out. Now, investigators weren't just dealing with an old missing person case. They were looking at a potential survival story lost to time. And the forest, once again, had more secrets to offer. The narrow trail drawn on the map led investigators deep into a part of the forest that hadn't been touched in decades, untamed, overgrown, and nearly invisible without satellite guidance. The deeper they ventured, the more unforgiving the terrain became. Branches clawed at their gear, the canopy thickened overhead, and the ground sloped unevenly downward toward a low valley. After nearly 2 hours of hiking, they found it, a moss-covered rock formation nestled between two ridgelines. Hidden behind layers of ivy and brush was the narrow mouth of a cave, dark, quiet, and eerily undisturbed. The entrance was just wide enough for one person to crouch through. Flashlights illuminated jagged stone walls and a tight, winding path that descended into a chamber carved by time and water. The air inside was cool, heavy with dampness and silence. Dust and sediment coated every surface, untouched by wind or wildlife. If someone had been there, they had been alone in every sense of the word. In the first chamber, searchers found a few scraps of fabric wedged between rocks. One piece was a faded red, just large enough to suggest it may have been torn from a shirt. Ellen Whitmore had always remembered what Daniel wore the day he vanished: a red baseball tee with white sleeves. The fabric was collected for testing. Nearby, buried beneath a pile of small stones, was a rusted flashlight. It was long dead, its battery corroded, but its casing was identical to a model sold in local stores during the mid-1980s. On one side, carved faintly into the metal, were two letters, DW. But what truly stunned investigators was what they discovered on the wall of the second chamber, a smooth stone surface where initials had been carved. DW, again. Beneath that, a stick figure drawing of a boy and a dog. The lines were crude and faint, but unmistakable. One figure had a small arc above its head, a collar or a leash, perhaps. The other had stick arms reaching forward. Above both was a faint etching of what looked like the sun. Hope, escape, or maybe a final goodbye. There were no human remains in the cave. No bones, no obvious signs of death. Just these remnants, a few pieces of a boy's life preserved like echoes in stone. The scene sent chills through the team. It suggested that Daniel hadn't vanished instantly or been taken far. He had run. He had survived, at least for a little while. And he had left clues, silent and patient, waiting all these years to be found. Experts speculated Daniel may have used the cave as a shelter. It was dry and cool, hidden well enough that no casual passerby could have spotted it. But why didn't he ever come out? Did he get lost in the dark tunnels beyond? Was he injured? Or had something else happened in those woods, something no map or carving could explain? When Ellen was shown photographs of the cave drawings, she broke down in tears. She recognized the little stick dog. Daniel had drawn pictures just like it in his notebooks. To her, there was no doubt, it was her son. He had been alive after that day in 1986. He had tried to come home. He had left a piece of himself behind, deep in the forest, waiting to be heard. The discovery of the cave reignited media attention and public fascination, but it also stirred old memories in people who had long kept silent. One of those people was Clyde Merrow, an 83-year-old recluse who had lived alone in a small, decaying cabin near the northern boundary of the Waverly Woods since the late 1970s. Locals called him Creek Man, a nickname passed down more out of habit than cruelty. Clyde rarely left his property, rarely spoke to anyone, and most assumed he had long slipped into the grasp of age and isolation. But when news about the cave and the collar resurfaced, something shifted in him. He contacted the sheriff's office, saying only, "I saw the boy, I remember." Detectives were skeptical. In the past, Clyde had offered strange stories to anyone who would listen, tales of lights in the trees, voices in the wind, or children laughing where there were no children. His mind had become a mix of memory and delusion. But this time, something was different. He was calm, certain. He recalled a late summer evening back in 1986, shortly after Daniel disappeared. Clyde had been by the creek behind his cabin, fishing in the fading light, when he saw movement across the water, something on two legs, moving low and cautious through the brush. Then, a flash of golden fur. A dog. Behind it, a boy. Small, skinny, dirty. "I thought he was a ghost," Clyde said, his voice shaking but firm. "The way he looked at me, like he didn't trust anyone." According to Clyde, the boy didn't speak. Just stared for a few moments before vanishing again into the trees. He remembered the red shirt, torn at the shoulder. And he remembered something else. The boy had something slung over his back, like a rolled-up blanket or jacket. Survival gear, maybe. A clue. Back then, Clyde had told a deputy what he saw. But his account was brushed off. He wasn't considered reliable. And as days turned into weeks and Daniel remained missing, his memory was chalked up to confusion or imagination. But now, with the cave discovery and the collar found just miles from Clyde's cabin, his story took on a haunting clarity. Detectives returned to Clyde's property and searched the creek trail he described. Though much had changed over 2 decades, satellite imaging showed that the path he referenced once connected directly to the area near the cave. A likely route for a frightened child trying to stay hidden, or trying to survive. The revelation caused a shift in public perspective. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about a disappearance, it was about a boy who may have endured alone, navigating a vast and indifferent wilderness. A boy who came close to being found, but never was. Clyde, looking out from his porch with clouded eyes, murmured something that stuck with the lead investigator for weeks. He was so close. Just needed someone to see him and believe it was real. Those words echoed like a quiet indictment of everyone who had given up. A few weeks after Clyde's revelation, a soft drizzle blanketed the Waverly Woods as Ellen Whitmore stood quietly at the mouth of the cave. The search team had completed their work, and the area was no longer restricted, though the air around it still felt sacred, heavy with memory, fragile with loss. Ellen had asked to be left alone. In her hands, she held 2 things. A bundle of fresh marigolds, Daniel's favorite flower, and a replica of Max's collar, a leather strap, carefully engraved with the same worn name tag. She stepped slowly into the entrance, her footsteps cautious, reverent, almost like walking into a church. She didn't go far, just to the first chamber where the drawings had been found. There, she knelt by the smooth stone wall, tracing her fingers along the faded initials carved into the rock. D.W. So small, yet screaming with meaning. Her breath caught in her throat. It was like touching his voice from a place where he had once hoped someone would come. Ellen pressed her forehead against the wall and whispered, "I found you, baby. I'm here." She left the marigolds at the base of the carving, the collar placed gently on top. Then she lit a small battery-powered candle and set it beside them. Its tiny light flickered against the dark stone, pushing back the shadows, even if just a little. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside, there was only quiet. When she emerged, her face was wet, not just from the rain, but from something deeper, something between sorrow and peace. For the first time in 20 years, she felt like she had reached him. Not fully. Not with answers. But with understanding. The cave, the collar, the drawings, they hadn't brought closure in the traditional sense. Daniel's body was still missing. His final fate remained uncertain. But what they had given was a voice to the years of silence, a glimpse into a story that had waited patiently to be told. It suggested a boy who hadn't vanished without a trace, but who had tried to survive, to escape, to find his way back. And maybe, at some point, he had gotten close. Too close. The town of Waverly quietly embraced the news. Some residents visited the cave trail. Others left flowers by the old fence in the Whitmore backyard. The case was never officially closed, but for many, the mystery was no longer about the unknown. It was about the courage of a child who, even in fear and darkness, had left a map, a memory, and a mark that could finally be heard. Ellen never stopped hoping. But now, that hope had changed shape. It wasn't the hope of a knock at the door or a phone call. It was the hope that her son had known she never gave up. That he wasn't forgotten. And that even in the deep silence of the forest, someone was still listening.